Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Dan Wright and I did a reunion conversation with cybersecurity expert Jeffrey Carr to revisit the infamously erroneous Crowdstrike analysis of the DNC hack, which they attributed to Russia based on their analysis of an alleged Russian hack of a Ukrainian military artillery app. We also discussed CrowdStrike's history, its recent mention in President Trump's phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky, the same phone call that led to his impeachment for a different reason, and the broader issue of how cybersecurity firms are incentivized to make specious claims concerning attribution of hacks, particularly if it gains them notoriety that leads to more business. Jeffrey Carr is a cybersecurity author, researcher, entrepreneur, and consultant who focuses on cyber warfare. He's the author of the book Inside Cyber Warfare, Mapping the Cyber Underworld, and he's the creator of the Suits and Spooks conference series, which, quote, bridges the gap between the intelligence community and industry on hard challenges in information security, unquote. We recorded this on December 17th, 2019. Today we're talking to Jeff Carr and Dan Wright, former co-host of the Around the Empire is back. So this is a reunion call.
All right.
Hi, Jeff. How you doing? Thanks for coming on the show again.
Yes. Hi. Happy holidays.
Yeah, so this is a reunion call. We did this back in April of 2017 on the same topic, and today we're going to revisit the CrowdStrike analysis that's sort of underneath a lot of this mess. And we interviewed you, Jeff, because you had written an article that got a lot of attention on the CrowdStrike analysis of the DNC hack, and the analysis involved a Ukrainian artillery app, and there were refutations and basically a discrediting of that CrowdStrike analysis. Now, since then, a lot has happened. Now we have had the Muller investigation, we had the GRU indictments, we had a Muller report, we had some court cases, we had a CrowdStrike IPO, we had a Trump call with Zelensky where he mentions CrowdStrike, and now we have an impeachment. So I'm thinking maybe let's just first revisit this whole thing and try to boil it down for the listeners who maybe didn't catch our first conversation, which I'll link that in the show notes for anybody who hasn't heard that. And then we can talk about like the original case that CrowdStrike made, and you basically took it down. You took down their analysis, I mean. And then maybe we can just talk about whether the CrowdStrike analysis continued to be used throughout the past 2.5 years. I think it did, despite everything that happened. So let's start out by just kind of, if we can, if you could, Jeff, just kind of boil down like what happened, how you got into this. Let's put it that way.
Well, it was actually before the DNC hack. See, CrowdStrike represents essentially the bigger problem, which is the privatization of cyber threat intelligence. So, and we saw this going way, back many years before with Mandiant, before they were acquired by FireEye. And so you have these private cybersecurity threat intelligence companies. They create sensational headlines having to do with a foreign government that is also at the time of political interest to the White House and whoever happens to be in the White House at the time. So when Obama, for example, was dealing with China, some of these companies would come out with new reports about Chinese actors. And if the White House was particularly concerned about Russia, these private firms would come out with reports about Russia. And so they do this intentionally to get headlines, because headlines translate into profits. Headlines translate into profits by attracting more and more business for the company that is featured in the New York Times or in the Wall Street Journal or in the Washington Post, any international widely read mainstream media outlet. So CrowdStrike sort of followed the business model that was initiated by Mandiant. They kept publishing sensational reports. This was something actually that Dmitry Alperovich did back when he was with McAfee, so it really goes back many years.
Yeah.
And it's just the way the business is done in this field, if you want to succeed. So that's sort of the big picture, the 50,000-foot view. When the DNC hack was announced, it was announced by CrowdStrike, this at the time privately owned cyber threat intelligence company. CrowdStrike was the only company that did the forensic analysis on the DNC breach, which a lot of folks, including myself, thought was unusual. That why wasn't it done by the FBI? Why? Still, there's no good answer to that. And then, of course, they, according to articles and interviews that were done with Dmitry Alperovich, CrowdStrike not only did the analysis, but they pushed political repercussions for Russia at the White House due to connections that Alperovich had with the Democratic Party, and that went back many years. So this to me as a professional in that field seemed completely out of any ethical standard that would apply to any professional field. None of this should have been done by a private firm, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others, that expressed either publicly or privately their concerns around CrowdStrike's behavior. They demonstrated at a later date when they published this article, this report about a Ukrainian hack on an artillery application, a mobile app for targeting artillery pieces, that there was literally no limit to what they were willing to publish, whether it was accurate or not. And there were so many inaccuracies that they had to make at least 2 retractions in their initial report that were sort of forced on them by these 2 different, very, very large and influential organizations. They never contacted the creator of the app, and they never demonstrated that their version of malware was ever circulated by the app. And in fact, some of the claims that they made were impossible for the malware to perform. So it simply rendered, in my opinion, any future finding by CrowdStrike, any present or historical finding by CrowdStrike, in doubt because of their actions.
For sure.
And
yeah.
And that's where I still have that opinion today. Unfortunately, it's the minority opinion. And of course, during all of this, they managed to pull off a $1 billion IPO.
Yeah.
And which really does go back to reinforce the success of that business model. And this is the problem with private companies doing the job that belongs to the federal government, which is intelligence gathering and analysis.
And the FBI has a competent cyber analysis team, right? And I mean, if they needed help, they could just bring in contractors too, right?
So the FBI has the biggest problem that the FBI has is a shortage of manpower, and and also because I regularly interact with the FBI, and so I can tell you that they are, for the most part, very diligent professionals, constantly looking for better ways to identify bad actors in cyberspace. And one of the things that was made clear to me just a few months ago, in some discussions with some field agents, was that they are always looking for ways to improve attribution, and they're looking for direct primary sources that can identify bad actors, because there is no good way of doing it using technical indicators alone. And this is really the big, there's a huge chasm of disagreement there between the government whose job is to identify and arrest bad actors, and the private sector of cybersecurity, whose job is to make money. The companies whose job it is to make money say that attribution is easy, and we do it all the time, and they rely on technical indicators, and they make claims, and yet there's little to no arrests being made, and no real ground truth to any of those claims. And the FBI is, if the FBI were aligned with the private sector, they wouldn't be worrying about attribution. They'd be making arrests by the hundreds.
Yeah.
But that's not the case, obviously. So
basically, they understand the difficulty of attribution, and the fact that there are a multitude of ways to impersonate someone, to spoof whatever IP addresses to make it look like you are originating from a different origination point. You can put like comments in some code, they're in a different language or metadata, or there are all kinds of ways to impersonate someone else, and everybody knows that. Right? Yeah.
Right. Exactly right. And you really need human sources that can come forward confidentially or otherwise and say they were present at the time. They can name names. That's what's needed when you're trying to attempt a prosecution. These reports that come out that are published by Crowdstrike and other companies, those are marketing. For the most part, those are marketing documents. They can't be used as evidence. It might, if anything, it might be a starting off point, but it's not sufficient for a prosecutor or for a United States attorney. So we have to really look at these companies with a very critical eye and understand that they're in business to make a profit, and that any reports that they generate are, for the most part, marketing tools meant to garner headlines.
And they have an incentive to hype, right? Like the parallel that, this has been a while since we talked, but is Cambridge Analytica, which to my mind, which had a lot of hype and eventually got hung by it because they claimed they did all these things that they actually probably didn't have the capacity to do. And it sparked, I guess, 1,000 conspiracy theories. Do you see a parallel there?
Yeah. Absolutely. That company also made many claims about what they can do with data. They had the difference, I think, with Cambridge Analytica was that they could actually deliver results for their customers. So they delivered. If you see the movie The Great Hack, the company did deliver at least 10 successful campaigns over a number of years when they were operating under a different name. So they prior to being Cambridge Analytica, I think I can't recall the name offhand, but they did essentially influence operations for Britain's Defense Department, for other countries' defense departments, and that involved regime change. And so those military applications of data, they simply continued to apply them, but they applied them, with under a civilian company named Cambridge Analytica.
Right. So they were kind of privatized. So I guess, I don't know if this is SCL Group. I know they had a few different names.
I think that was it. Yes, I think that was it.
It's kind of
so
the reverse.
Difference between, in that case, in other words, what they did at the time actually, they actually delivered results. What many of these cybersecurity companies do is they publish reports, but they deliver no results. There's no convictions. There's no arrests. There's not even any proof that the reports are accurate, and there's absolutely no accountability if the reports turn out to be inaccurate. So
now, Jeff, after we talked, I didn't do due diligence in following the CrowdStrike story as well as I should have probably, but I know in general, there were some GRU indictments. Now, did they also base their indictments on the CrowdStrike analysis, or was there more and better information provided? Did things get any better with that?
Those are I didn't read that. Those came out after I stopped working on this.
Mm-hmm.
I do recall, recently reading reading something about that those indictments, and it seemed like the only connection with Fancy Bear was a website, that sort of comedic "We Are Fancy Bear" website that the hackers threw up on their own.
Yeah.
And knowing that the indictments won't actually face, they're not going to actually face court. Like, they're indicting these people who are in Russia, so it's not like they're going to actually have to face a court challenge, right?
Well, I felt like, at the time, I felt like whoever did this was just using the name Fancy Bear because it was in the headlines all the time. So they just put up a website that said "We Are Fancy Bear."
I know, I'm sorry, but it is
mocking.
pretty funny.
Yeah. And then to see that that's like the only piece of evidence connecting, these guys to the name Fancy Bear, I thought, well, there you go. This is, there's nothing tangible here. And so of course, what the government may say is that, well, we have classified evidence, which, was not in the report. And there's really nothing I can say to that. Nothing anybody can say to that.
Which is the point, right? That's the point. Nobody can refute it.
Yeah. It's so I can only address what they make public, and if what they make public is exceedingly weak, then that should be pointed out. I think we've revisited recently. A journalist revisited the Sony hack 5 years later,
right?
And in fact, the skepticism has grown stronger that it was not the North Koreans,
which we retaliated against, right?
And that included executives at Sony that said this never really felt like North Korea to us.
And there was a U.S. response, right? If I recall correctly.
Yeah.
U.S. launched a cyber attack in response to what may have been a misattributed analysis by CrowdStrike.
Well, I don't think that the U.S. actually claimed credit for that. I think that they made a point of saying that was not us, but they did write more sanctions and issue more sanctions against North Korea for the Sony attack. So they did officially lay it at the feet of North Korea, and they did issue new sanctions against the country.
So things keep marching on. I'm pretty sure that Comey still insists that the CrowdStrike analysis was good, and we kept marching ahead with the Muller report. And like you said, CrowdStrike did $1 billion IPO, so Dmitry Alperovich is now, I don't know, at least a multi-millionaire, maybe a billionaire. And then we have this bizarre phone call with Trump and Zelensky. I don't know how much you know about this. I kind of dismissed it. I thought that he was probably confusing a couple different stories together, but what he said in the phone call with Zelensky, I'll read you just one part of it where he mentions this. This is Trump speaking. He says, "I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people. The server, they say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, or I would like you to get to the bottom of it."
Right.
And then he says one more thing. He says, "As you saw yesterday, the whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Muller, an incompetent performance. But they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. Whatever you do, it's very important that you do it if that's possible." So the issue of Ukraine interfering with the 2016 election, although the mainstream media calls it a big conspiracy theory, there actually is something to that story, and it begins being documented in a January 2017 Politico article by Ken Vogel, and there's a Ukrainian whistleblower. He worked at the Ukrainian embassy in DC. His name's Andrei Teleshenko. So there's that story, but as far as I know, that story doesn't have anything to do with CrowdStrike or the DNC server. This is about Alexandra Chalupa and soliciting some information on Manafort and possibly some other things, but not anything to do with the DC hack. Do you happen to know is there anything more to this that you've heard about, or anything to add to that?
No, no. I was interviewed by Scott Shea at the New York Times about it, and he interviewed a few other folks and wrote a piece about the Ukraine angle. And basically, it boils down, I think, to one or two Ukrainian journalists that believe that it was Ukrainian hackers that broke into the DNC pretending to be Russian hackers, and I think that's the source that of this sort of conspiracy theory that Trump was referring to. Nobody else believes it, including me.
It's a strange theory, really, when you think about it. What they're saying, the hack was in Ukraine, and then they hacked, and then it was like a setup job, a false flag, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Because there's another theory. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There was just recently something else published on a Ukrainian blog saying that Ukraine security services arrested some hackers that were supposedly responsible for the DNC hack, and so I contacted a friend of mine who I trust, that I've known for many years, who's in Ukraine and who has connections and contacts at Ukraine security services, and asked him to check on that for me, and he did, and said that there's his contacts said they had heard nothing about any such arrests. So I think this all is sort of just some fake news, for lack of a better term. I don't really put any stock in it. I mean, I have no idea who's responsible for the DNC hack. It could be Russian hackers, it could be Ukrainian hackers, it could be German hackers. or American hackers. I mean, really, there's just no way of knowing.
Right.
17 intelligence agencies, Jeff. We hear that every time. 17 intelligence. The Coast Guard is all over this.
Yeah, yeah. I know. It's and really that's it. It's all a moot point now because the U.S. government officially, has blamed Russia. So that sort of put the seal of approval, on what CrowdStrike has been doing.
And like you say, it might have been them, or it may have been Ukraine hackers. We just don't have any data or witnesses. Now, that latest story, I think I sent you that link, and you looked into it, and I'm sure you came across it in other ways. But in that one, they actually claim that arrests were made, but they also claim that there was a meeting, and there was someone from NSA was involved in the meeting, and that some Americans got together with some Ukrainians, and that and these arrests were made. So you think that's just, as far as your source says, doesn't know anything about that, doesn't think it happened, right?
Right. There's no official. He was not able to get any official acknowledgement that any such meetings or arrests were made. And he's a legit guy who's been in there for many years, and I have a high degree of trust in him, more so than just a blog.
Yeah.
A blog entry.
Right. I thought that Trump might be. There was also a theory that that Gusford 2 wasn't really who he claimed to be. That CrowdStrike had created this persona, and that, but it's still a theory. There's no way to prove it, but I still hold that out as a possibility. That's a possibility, but do you know of any? Like, I think Trump here is at least implying that CrowdStrike is owned by a Ukrainian when he says, "I guess one of your wealthy people." As far as you know, Dmitry Alperovitch, he's Russian, right? Russian American?
Yes, I think so. I think he's Russian. I really don't know his background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no secret ownership behind him that you know of, is there?
Like an investor, I was thinking maybe there was a Ukrainian investor he was referring to.
Yeah.
But not. I'm not aware. But I don't know. I have no idea. There are so many. Before CrowdStrike's IPO, they raised so much money from private investment that and there's no way of knowing who wrote those checks. I guess. Oh, I guess there is if you go through the SEC. Maybe there's maybe a forensic accountant can figure all that out. But I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that I hadn't thought of it.
To.
Now that it's public, I had not thought about like who its main shareholders are or whatever. I guess it could mean that either he's confused or maybe there is some nugget in here that makes sense, but I don't know. Well, you've dealt with him for a while, right, Jeff? You've known of Dmitry Alperovitch for quite a long time, right? Yeah.
Sure. I know. I think I know all of CrowdStrike's executives that I've met, personally at one time or another, or dealt with via email over many years, and that's all. That's really, in my mind, got nothing to do with anything. I worked for years at Microsoft. We had lots of Chinese, Vietnamese, Russian, Indian engineers there. Any one of them, could have done malicious things that would have absolutely no bearing on their respective governments. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that whole well, it's in Russian language, therefore it's Russian government. That whole line of argument never made any sense to me. And so whatever Dmitry Alperovich's background is, I don't see that as being really relevant. The fact that he's conducted himself in such an unprofessional manner for so many years is to me what's relevant, and that they came out with a terrible, report on a supposed hack that never happened of Ukraine of this military officer's targeting app is relevant, and that there were absolutely no repercussions for that, which is the big, to me, the big issue that everyone should be concerned about. You can't have these private companies running making policy for the U.S. government. That is just fundamentally wrong and dangerous. And I think that we're looking at issues with the Chinese government and the Russian government, to nuclear power states, plus trade wars, plus sanctions, and that's at least a portion of that blame lies at the feet of some of these privately owned cyber intelligence companies.
Are they getting a benefit?
The media that promoted them.
I was going to say, are they getting a benefit maybe with the IPO and other things from what I hear when you see the establishment try to cover this, that basically nobody really understands, or at least maybe because it's older people or maybe just people who aren't technologically inclined, they don't really understand cyber warfare or any of these things. So these guys are really good at marketing themselves as experts.
Right.
They might not be the best, but they're the best at marketing themselves. And so people who don't have a lot of knowledge base kind of buy into it.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And that's like
exactly right. And then you'll say, and then what'll happen is that they'll say, well, we spent 5 years in working as a intelligence analyst at the NSA or at Cyber Command or at CIA or at FBI, whatever it might be, a 3-letter agency, and I was there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So therefore, I know what I'm doing, which is another, fake, a false argument.
So it's just a matter of trust. It's just a matter of reputation, but there's so much irony here. I mean, the CrowdStrike IPO is such a spectacular example of failing upward. But as you said,
it really is.
It was a gold rush. The whole cyber business, there was a very clear gold rush. All the defense contractors jumped into it.
And Wall Street just jumped in too, because they needed to protect their banks after all those hacks of Target and all these other credit cards.
And then the Muller report just boosted that name, and it just reinforced the model that Jeff is telling us is such, a huge problem. And overall, I see it as a danger, okay? Because all they have to do is get CrowdStrike, get a contract with them, tell them, I want you to prove that I want you to say that she did it. They could throw me in jail, right?
Or more importantly, they could have a basic flaw that some private actor exploited and embarrassed a major, Fortune 500 company, and they'll say, "Hey, can you write this up like it was a foreign intelligence agency with very sophisticated, and that's why we got beat." I mean, that's how I would say it as PR spin.
All kinds of combinations of things they could do, because as Jeff has shown and other people have shown, it was a hugely flawed analysis, and it still is. It still is.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it still is, and there's no oversight, no repercussions. So it's literally printing money to just say what you want to say. If you can write it up in a way that is reasonably understandable by the average person, and you've got a good bad guy, like North Korea is an excellent bad guy because everybody hates North Korea,
right?
And so is Russia, and maybe today maybe to a little bit lesser extent is China. So you have a good bad guy, and you have a reasonably understandable case to make, and a bunch of circumstantial evidence. That's all you need. You literally can print money with that.
Oh, like they're like a sort of external validator. There used to be these people who they'd hire economists when someone get caught insider trading to kind of show like there wasn't really an economic downside or something. Kind of expert witnesses for a lawyer. Is that kind of what CrowdStrike could end up being? The kind of a PR operation where they say, well, they did everything they could. They actually, but they couldn't beat adversary X because spending such sophistication, which of course does play into the security state, because then they say, well, obviously we need to fund DHS and NSA more. Fort Meade needs more money. These guys can't beat it, these private actors.
Well, I remember when the president of FireEye literally said those words about Sony. It was the first time that I had ever heard an executive make that kind of a statement. That he had said that there was no way that Sony could defend itself because it was a sophisticated attack by a foreign government. So it gave Sony, they tried to give Sony a cover in terms of any responsibility.
Oh, for litigation, sure.
No liability.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, there's all kinds of ways this is so useful. Well, listen, I know we've kept you a little bit over, Jeff. Anything else that you want to throw out there? And also, make sure you tell everybody where to find your work, how to support your work, and all of that.
Yeah, thank you. So the best way to follow my work is through Suits and Spooks. Easy to do, suitsandspooks.com. And we are doing our 10th year anniversary event in February in Washington, D.C. I hope you guys can come. The good news is journalists get to come for free.
Oh.
So, yeah, but I appreciate the opportunity you gave me with the interview, and I hope that we see a sea change in the future. I don't know what might bring that about, but I'm still hopeful that things will correct themselves in this field.
Oh, I think I can think of one thing that might bring that about, Jeff. If somebody, a vaunted public figure, gets falsely accused of hacking, I think that's about our only hope.
Yeah, maybe that might do it. Well, I do have to run. So
okay.
Thanks very much. It was great fun chatting with you both.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
And happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
You too. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Jeffrey Carr. Follow Jeff on Twitter at Jeffrey Carr, JEFFREYCARR. Find the Suits and Spooks conference series at suitsandspooks.com. Find his writing on his blog, jeffreycarr.blogspot.com. And read his book, Inside Cyber Warfare, Mapping the Cyber Underworld. Around the Empire podcast is independent media, and your support's really important. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. There are a lot of ways to find this podcast and to listen to it. Find it on any mobile podcast app or on the website aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.